Hey, Curtis. Welcome to Automate All the Things. I'm so excited to have you.
Hey, Aaron. Thanks for having me on. Really excited to get started.
Yeah. So as always, hello to everyone in the chat. It's been a couple weeks since I've been live. So really excited to be back behind my own mic, and really excited to have you, Curtis, here with us. So we'll start, as we always do, with a quick introduction into yourself. So Curtis, tell us a little bit about you and what you do at On Deck and about On Deck generally.
Yeah, so my background is as a software engineer. Been doing that for close to 20 years. Just a year and a half ago, I found no code and kind of fell for it really hard. Got into Twitter, got into a bunch of communities, and started interacting and helping people out. I joined On Deck to run the no code infrastructure team, and it's a really unique role and a unique team. You probably don't have never heard of a no code infrastructure team because I think we're the first one to have one. But really, what we do is we try to enable everyone at On Deck to be able to build no code solutions at scale and reliably, which is really important when you're getting past the MVP stage. And because I've got a background in software engineering, that means I know the ins and outs of things like APIs and some of the custom scripting you can do. So it's really a superpower when you compare code and no code together.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're among one of, I think, the first developers to kind of cross over, if you will. I don't think that's the right word, because I think there's a gray area between code and no code, which is where a lot of the power of what we do lies. So I'm curious, what you as a software developer, kind of when you saw this ability to create without code, got you excited, and so much so that it let you kind of, well, cross the chasm, if you will.
Yeah, I still do a lot of coding day in, day out. We build lots of tools for people to build on top of for no code.
Mm.
But yeah, the first thing that attracted me was the automation stuff. So Zapier and Integromat. With those, I can spin up APIs and do a bunch of things that would usually take me a solid day or a week to do, which was amazing. And then that got me into things like Adalo and Builder and some of the like AutoCode. And now instead of having to host all these things myself and taking maybe a week or two to get an idea from my head to actually being able to interact with it, I can do that in hours or days. And it's amazing. You can kind of capture your inspiration and not lose it. Very frequently, you start building something in code, and then 2 weeks later, you're not quite as excited about that idea anymore. But with no code, you can kind of ship it and validate it almost immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as someone who has a lot of ideas and not necessarily the motivation to, stand up all of the infrastructure that it takes, back end, front end, middleware. I've said this on the stream before, but I started as studying to be a software engineer, but having to stand up anything took so much time that I was like, oh, it's not for me. So, similarly, I got excited about, the ability to have Airtable spin up a database, and then your front end is in Webflow, and then, or whatever you mentioned, Adalo and others. So, yeah, I think I'm really excited about the stream because I think we're kind of cut from the same cloth. So, but here we're here to talk about APIs. So I do want to spend a moment before we dive into working with them, maybe talk to us about what is an API. How should people think about APIs, when to use them, especially you as a software developer, you use them constantly. So I think the word API gets thrown around. So what is an API?
Yeah, so really where this whole stream idea came from was I was trying to send a resource to a friend of mine who is a no-coder getting into some more advanced stuff, and I couldn't find any good resources that didn't have 5 or 6 pages of just fluff that you didn't need to know. You don't need to know what the acronym means or who invented it or the history of all that stuff. So really, I wanted a resource that you could dig right into, and that's what I'd love to share today. So yeah, as a programmer, software developer, you're using APIs, but even just as a non-technical user, you're using APIs every single minute of every day. And that's not an exaggeration. Your phone is using an API to check if you've got new messages. Same with Slack. My computer is using OBS Ninja to send the feed to you, and you're sending it to YouTube, which is sending it to everyone who's watching. That's all through APIs. And it's no different with all of the no-code tools you use, whether it's Bubble, Builder, Airtable, Zapier, or Integromat. These are all very API heavy. And as a no-coder, you can unlock all these advanced features of your existing tools and give yourself some amazing flexibility if you can understand what these APIs are. So at a high level, it stands for Application Programming Interface, which you can just throw that away right away. You don't really need to know what it means. Basically, it's a way for one computer to talk to another computer, and that is it. There's a when you're reading API docs, that's describing kind of the contract. It's like you and me conversing. I say, hey, I only speak English, and these are the things I can do for you. That's exactly what an API is doing, but they're computers, so they talk much more structured. It can't be as free form. So they basically say, hey, these are the things I can do for you. These are the things I can provide to you as information. Here's how you have to talk to me. Here's the things I accept, and here's the format they have to be in. So once you've seen and understand kind of one API, you can apply that to all the other ones, and you can kind of see, oh, this is just the contract. This is how I talked to this computer to get the information I need. And then you start wiring up all sorts of crazy things. And then once you see kind of where APIs are used, you start seeing them everywhere. Because no joke, everything that you do on your computer is technically being done via APIs. So just parts of a computer or different servers talking to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of crazy to think that this is just a bunch of text, right, being essentially talked between computer that we stylize using, CSS or whatever styling. But at its core, it's just one computer being like, hi, I am authenticating, give me the piece of information that I need, get stylized, and that happens thousands of times per second. So last thing I kind of want to jump into and ask you is, you mentioned contract, which I think is a really good way of thinking about how computers speak to each other via APIs. So what are some elements of that contract that folks need to think about as they're reading maybe their first, what are the big elements of the contract that they need to understand through reading the documentation before they can make an API call, which we'll explain what that is in a moment.
Yeah, so there's just a few. Obviously, you can dive into the deep end on any one of these, and we can do that in later streams or in extra credit. But really, the first thing is URL. So you're used to dealing with URLs every day. You visit websites, they have URLs. APIs have the exact same thing. Every API has a unique URL where you can access and talk to it. It has to, otherwise you not know where to talk to it. So same way you have a phone number and I know how to reach you, you know how to reach different APIs, because in the documentation, it'll say, hey, this is the URL you use. Then there are these verbs, and they seem intimidating, but they're actually pretty easy. You'll see them. There's 4 of them that are mainly used. Post is used to create things. Get is to get information or a list of things. Patch is to update things, and delete is to delete. So what you'll see in these contracts is they're basically like how computers speak. So you'd never say, hey, I want to post something or I want to patch something, but that's the way computers have to, like, everyone has to agree that these are the things we're going to do and these are the things we're going to support. So it sounds very computery, but that's just the nomenclature that they have. And then beyond that, the other 2 things, authorization is something you mentioned. We'll probably go lightly into it, but basically that's most of the APIs you're going to interact with are going to want an API key that uniquely identifies you as the user. And that's so that if I'm looking up information, I don't get your information, I get the information in my account. And then the other thing is just using JSON. So 99% of the APIs you're going to use are going to use this language called JSON. You've probably seen it if you've done any no-code stuff, but it's the curly braces and the square braces, and we'll get into seeing actual examples of that when we do Bannerbear. But it's the way that you can pass information to the computer. So you're not passing just text. It's actually a little bit more structured, and there's different ways that APIs are going to say, hey, when you're creating an image, I want stuff in this format, and you just follow that format, and that is called JSON.
Yeah. Okay. So what people need to remember, and I think this is where a lot of confusion or stress kind of arises, is like, oh, like I've heard about this REST API thing. What is a patch call? What is a put call? Right? What is post? So what I want throughout the stream is forget everything, right? We're going to go piece by piece. We're going to authenticate. We're going to find the URL. We're going to do that. And essentially, this is the process that you have to go through for each API that you want to use. Right, so we're going to use Bannerbear in this example, which is a very clean API, very simple API, and a very useful one, which lets you create images automatically, right? And we're actually going to start with creating an API call in Postman, which is just a way to just do API calls, test them out, really, and it'll kind of abstract a lot of the infrastructure that you need. And then we're going to do the same API call in Airtable, which will make it much more functional and much more dynamic. So with that, I see we've got a bunch of folks in the chat. We've got Corey, Steven, Connor, Oh wow, the regulars are here. Penny's here. So let us know in the chat if you're excited. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with everyone. There we go. Now everyone should see my screen. And same thing for you. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. So Curtis, you should see my screen as well. And so our agenda for today, boom. So what is an API? We just covered that. So I think we can check that off our list. So I thought, Curtis, what do you think about doing an overview of the Bannerbear API, kind of talking about all of the pieces that you just mentioned, right? Authentication, URL, how do we understand that? So I'm here on Bannerbear. The API documentation is, where is there? Oh, they have it contextualized. Okay. So maybe first, Curtis, give us an overview of what Bannerbear does and how does the API connect to Bannerbear?
Yeah, and while I do that, maybe there is an actual API reference that we might be able to go through,
Okay.
and I can talk through the different 4 different pieces. So Bannerbear is an image generation. Now it does video as well. But basically, you can set up templates, and Aaron's got one set up there. And you can drag and drop different elements onto your template, whether that's images or text, and even cooler stuff like graph elements. And then you use an API to provide it all the variables it needs. So if you, for example, in this one, if you want to change that text in the middle, you'd actually provide that and it would give you back an image that has the text that you provided it. So it's a really great way of generating images for like SEO, for blog articles, or if you're doing social media posts, you can use Airtable to wire up Bannerbear and generate images that you can share along with your text-based content. So it's just a really fantastic API for generating images and videos, and it's very simple to use. And it's got a lot of great templates to get you started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm just showing some examples here. I thought this one was really cool where you can dynamically insert an image. And this looks like a perfect, like, oh, I need a thumbnail for a blog post. I also need a thumbnail for social media. And all of that I want to be created dynamically, but I don't want to spend time, recreating each one of those. And this is a pain that I feel extremely deeply as someone who has to create thumbnails every week and streams every week. So I'm really actually excited about the, often, Curtis, I use the stream as like a personal way to create things that I would create anyway and have folks, experts like you help me. So what I'm hoping is that we are able to kind of create these for me in the future, but a bunch of really cool examples. So how does, right, how does the API kind of tie into this template where I've got some text, I've got an image, like what does the API do and how should I think about it in the context of this image?
Yeah, so if you scroll down just a little bit into where it shows you kind of the JSON, it kind of walks you through. It shows you at the top, you're going to be making a post call. It gives you the URL you're meant to post to, and you'll see how we wire that up in Postman. And that gives you this giant blob, and that's JSON right there. So you see the curly braces and all the brackets. And essentially, the couple of places that, so you see where we have name, message, and then you can change this text. Whatever you change that text to, and we can actually do this live, if you just add some text into there, and then hit send API request, it'll actually, the name has to stay what it was.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, there, yeah. Because so basically when you're looking at your template, message is the name of the thing it wants to change. And then you're just saying, hey, here's the text I want. And you can even do stuff like changing the color. But if you hit send API request, it'll give you back the image that matches.
Got it. So, oh, it's got, oh, I already like this tool. I already like it. It's a tool for me. So how do I, so let me just, I'm going to say back to you what you just said to me. So I made a post call to Bannerbear's images endpoint, that URL that you were talking about. I authenticated because I'm in, Bannerbear, so it knows that I'm authenticated. And this right here is the JSON, right? And essentially it says, okay, the modifications I want to make to this template are that I want to change the name. We're saying that this is a message that I'm sending. And the text I want to show is Curtis is awesome. I'm not changing the background. I'm not changing any colors. And so what is a response? How should I interpret this? Right? Like I guess this is like me sending the contract and this is them like returning what they promised. But how should I think about this?
Right. So this is So when you're dealing with APIs, it's not meant for humans, although humans
Right.
do use it a lot now. So when they're sending JSON back and forth, this is very much the computers talking to one another. So the contract is, hey, you need to send me this information that was on the left, and then the contract works the other way too. It's saying I'm going to send you this in response. So it's going to be details about like it might be echoing back some of the inputs you gave so you can confirm, and then it's also going to give you a bunch of things like the URLs. So
Right.
there's some pings and JPEG URLs, and then in a lot of APIs, especially when you're creating something using Post, you'll get back a unique ID. It's like having someone's name, except we're dealing with computers here. So the names are usually a mixture of numbers and letters. They don't mean anything to us. But if you ever want to look something up by its ID, that's useful to get back. So just because the way computers are talking to one another, they're like, hey, you just created a thing. Here's its ID. If you ever want to use it in the future, that's the ID you'd use. And if you actually want to see this picture, if you scroll down just a little bit into images down below, it's a different section. It'll actually
Uh,
show you just a little bit further down.
Further
So
down.
that's the JSON it gave it back. Yeah,
Right.
further down the
Yeah.
page under images, it'll
Oh,
actually
okay.
show
Right
you
here.
what
Oh,
image
okay.
it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Amazing.
so
There we
this
go.
is so we'll end up doing this in Postman, but what Bannerbear is hooked up here is like a light version of Postman, where it's basically saying here's the response you get back, and then it's showing you the image, and it'll actually show you the history of all the images you've ever generated through the API in this little
Interesting.
UI here.
Okay, great. So essentially, what we're going to do is in Postman kind of recreate this API call. And then two things are going to happen. We're going to have this text response that eventually in Airtable, we're able to like interpret and put as an attachment in our Airtable field. But as well, Postman is automatically going to like create it here so I can save that image manually, right? So those are the two things that are like in the contract, if you will. So our next step here is to recreate this call right here, but not from Bannerbear, right? So we want to make this API call, right? So sign this contract, if you will, or implement this contract in another tool. So the tool we're going to use is Postman. So for folks who aren't familiar with Postman, Curtis, can you kind of give an overview of when to use Postman? What's it good for? Especially as a developer, as a no coder, how should folks think about Postman?
Yeah, so Postman is it's a pretty advanced tool. I mean, it's got a lot of advanced stuff, but just on the face of it, the basic stuff is it lets you make all these API calls, and you can change between the verb you're using. So post, get, patch. You can basically explore an API. So it's really great if you're jumping into an API and you want to test out like, oh, what's like, yeah, I could read the contract, but I could also just say, hey, what happens when I get a list of images? And then you can see the JSON that comes back. There are some more advanced tools where you can actually share APIs. So you can actually create a big and document APIs and share those with people. So Notion, for example, shares their APIs as a Postman collection that you can import, and then you can just plug in your API key and start using Postman to really, it's great for exploring. So it's a really advanced tool for exploring an API. And then you can move this into, say, Zapier or Integromat or into Airtable like we're going to do today.
Absolutely. So what I've done is I've created a collection called Bannerbear. Collections are just like reusable API calls, right? And just I'll do a quick overview of the interface, and Curtis, correct me if I'm missing anything here, right? So we're creating a collection, and then you could have all of your API calls that relate to that collection in like a folder, right? So you can have your authentication, which we'll talk about in a moment, at the folder level, which will cascade into all of your API calls. This has two advantages. One is you're not like showing your API all the time. Second, as a streamer, it hides it, which is great. But I haven't done that for this specific moment. That's an example. And then the interface kind of lets you how should I say this, Curtis? Like implement all of the different elements of that API call, right? So the verb, the authentication, the different parameters you want to set, the URL, right? So it's just an interface that is very useful. There's a hosted interface for testing and making API calls. So Curtis, walk me through, how do I replicate this call, right, in Postman? And I think ideally, do you want to use the API reference as it is right here, or do you want to use this right here?
It's probably good to use both, but let's start with the API reference so we can
Okay.
walk through a couple things that people would want to see. So when you're looking at an API, the first thing that you'll probably see at the top is there's going to be some general high-level contract stuff about like what errors look like, how you want to authenticate, and that's a really important thing, and maybe what we can start with.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to tell you how do you tell me who you are so I can actually give you the information. So in this case, and like I said before, the most common is through an API key. And so what you'll do in Postman is if we go into Postman, in the authorization tab, you can just change that to bearer token.
Let me just
And
move
then
it.
you just paste, you just paste the token. So where you get the token from is actually in the Bannerbear project.
Boom, project.
So you'll have to go back to project home. And then
Boom,
at the top, there's settings/API key.
boom.
And there is an API key you can use. Yeah.
All right. If for anyone trying it, I'm on the free plan, so you can have fun. So I just copy paste the token. There are a lot of these, right? Different types of authentication. We're using a bearer token because that is what they specify in their API docs, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of them. Like I said, most of them are going to use an API key, which is technically, in technical terms, a bearer token.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like Google will use something called OAuth. There's a whole bunch of ways you can do these API requests, but for now, we'll just use bearer tokens, and that's what the vast majority of the stuff you're going to use will accept.
Okay. So first part of the contract, like I'm telling you, I'm Aron, and then Bannerbear is like, yeah, but how do you like? We're saying the token, and then they're like, oh, that's Aron. Okay, let's go like look at their projects and see. Like they're like, okay, it's cool. This is Aron. Keep going. So what is the next? I'm authenticated now via Postman. Just had a blank there. So what is the kind of next step as you're looking through this API of like, okay, what do I need? Verb,
Yes.
URL.
Yeah, so all that is going to be in the core resources area. So if you click on images, and every API is going to be a little different, but basically APIs are talking about things. So usually in the API documentation, you can go look for the thing you're interested in, whether that's like an email subscriber, a template. In this case, it's an image. So what it's going to show us here, and on the right, it shows us we can post and we can get. So that means I can create an image and then I can get a particular image.
Right.
The hint there is that it wants an ID, and then get. Usually, if it's just like /images, it's saying I want to get a list of images. So give me all the images for this template, for example.
Okay, got it. Okay, so we want to create an image. So imagine this right here is what we're going to kind of be using in Postman as a first example.
Yeah, so if we go to the actual Bannerbear project where we had that, where we did our first request. So you click on the template. Yeah, so they kind of help you out here and they give you the full URL you need to use and they tell you it's a post call. So if you could just copy that URL.
Boom, I'm going to copy this into the request URL, remove that, and then I'm saying here is a post call, right? So now we have three elements. We have the verb, we have the URL, and we're authenticated.
Right. So now with post in particular, so posting and updating, you need to pass it a whole bunch of information usually in the form of a JSON blob. And so that's why those particular API calls use something called a body. And it's just because you can't possibly, so you may have seen API calls where there's a bunch of stuff in the URL. You can't possibly pass all that information in the URL. So there's a concept of body. So if you go to your project section, we can just copy and paste that whole JSON blob and put it in the body.
Before we do that, how about we create, let's actually, one of the endpoints, maybe just us showing it off is like we have get images, right? So before we create a post, how about we just do a get images, right? So we're getting, my understanding is that this should return all the images we've created so far. Is that kind of understanding? Yeah. So let's give it a try. So here at the bottom, we have the response. And that is essentially the kind of image we had just created. So if I open this, it opens it as a URL. Right? We see that image that we had just created. So that's actually one of the easier verbs. If you're just getting used to an API, like a get call is usually it has no body, right? You can just get emails or lists, right? And it'll return all the lists. And that way you know that you're like authenticated properly, you've got good verb structure. Now, there we go. But let's move this back to post. That was just an example. So now instead of pulling or getting the information from this endpoint, let's actually post to create a new image. And that was a great point. Let's go to here, right? And we're copy pasting this whole JSON. Go ahead.
Yep, that's good. So a lot of API docs, there's a few big providers. Most of them will give you an example. So you can copy and paste that in, and then you just modify the stuff you need. Bannerbear takes it a step further and is a lot more helpful. So yeah, it's fantastic that they generate this for you. It's exactly tailored to your template.
So where do I go into body? And then it seems like
there's a couple
types. Yeah, types. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so you can pretty much ignore all of this except for raw. And then you change it from text to JSON on the far right.
Okay.
This is going to get you into 90% of the APIs. For the other ones, happy to dive into those like Twitter DMs or whatever, but mostly you don't have to do anything but JSON. And this is very much a developer tool, and that's why there's all these possibilities. You saw all the authorization types and all these body types. Yeah, there are some really weird APIs out there, but you're probably never going to deal with them in no-code land, so you don't really have to deal with that.
Yeah, so Curtis, this stream is a 90% stream, in that if you can get us 90% of the way there, we're really never going to talk about the other 10%. But if you ever hit it, Curtis is definitely a good resource on Twitter. So Colleen, if you can drop his Twitter handle in the chat, I'll let everybody know where to go when you've got API questions. Just make them public, right? So make sure to not DM him, but tag him, so we can all learn from that kind of your experience using an API. So here, what you're saying is make it raw, right? So just pasting text, and make it JSON so it recognizes, whether our JSON is properly structured. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste what we had before, right? And now let's go ahead and change the text here again to say, let me change that to say, what should this say? This should say, message Curtis on Twitter for any questions. There we go. And so I think we have everything. We have our verb, we have the URL, we're authenticated, and because this is a post call, it requires a body, which we've inputted, and we see this little green that tells us you have a good JSON, right? Doesn't mean that it's correct, right? But we know that it is a JSON. So if I send this, computer Postman is going to talk to Bannerbear and return if all went well. So status pending. So now I imagine, where do I see the image once it's ready?
Right. So yeah, I want to dive into this after. So if you go back into the Bannerbear project where we were before, and you refresh that page, you should see that image pop up in the images section, because it is one that we generated. So now instead of one image, there should be two.
Boom. Amazing.
So if you expand that, so there you go. But so there's one other part of the Bannerbear API, and this is just, not all APIs have this, but Bannerbear is interesting, where an image sometimes takes a long time to generate, maybe 10 to 20 seconds. So the way Bannerbear works is, when you give it a request, it doesn't immediately give you back the image, because it might take too long. So what you're supposed to do is give it a webhook URL to then post the image URL to. But if you go to the API reference, there's actually a newer feature in Bannerbear that we're going to use in the Airtable example. So if you go back up to the top where it says async sync, so Bannerbear now has a synchronous API. So async is its default. It's basically you say, hey, create me an image, and then later, 10 seconds, 15 seconds later, it's going to post to another URL and say, here's your image. The synchronous one says, as soon as you give me the request, I'm gonna create it for you and then give you it right back. But the caveat there is, it might take 10 to 20 seconds to generate it. So in a case like this, where we're going to use an Airtable or an Zapier, totally fine to wait that 10 seconds. It actually makes things a lot simpler. If you're doing this like from Bubble and you want to immediately generate an image, probably better to do the async way. But the way to opt into sync is you just put sync dot before API. So if we do that in Postman, we'll see what happens.
So let me understand this correctly. In most cases, we could say, okay, do the image when you're ready. Here's a URL where you can tell that URL that the image is ready, and you can send all that good information around the, how to host that image. But in this case, we're saying actually only respond with the image. So we'll get it right away. And I think in most cases, this is a really good way of like testing, I think, to like test, make sure that it works. And in some instances, async doesn't work, right? So if you're a no coder in the async part where you're sending a call and then waiting for the response, you might not be able to kind of interpret that response. Airtable and Zapier can, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But let's go ahead and just do sync. And my understanding is that nothing changes about the API call. It's just that the response might take a little bit more time, but it'll come back with the actual image.
Right.
Okay, cool. Let's give it a try. Boom. Okay, boom. So we have the image URL right here. Let's copy paste that. So you notice that it didn't return like a pending. It said completed. And so if we go here, we have our image, and I think it should be in here as well. Boom. Too low. Boom. We have our third image. So I think, Curtis, I think, folks, I think this is a confetti moment. We just did our first API call. I think we can drop some confetti. Give ourselves a nice little tap on the back. Great work, everyone. We've just kind of introduced a new tool, created our first API call, created that image. Get confetti. Yes, Alex. I love it. Get confetti. Absolutely. So there we go. Yeah, it's been a while since we've done some confetti on the stream, so that felt really good. Okay, so let me know in the chat if there are any questions around how to post air horns. Yeah, about Postman and the API. I think where I want us to go from here is, well, okay, this is great, right? But it doesn't really augment my workflow. Like I'm making an API call. I still have to enter the text manually. I still have to go to Bannerbear. I have to save the image. I have to bring it back into my workflow. So far, we're kind of disjointed in our workflow. So how do we bring this into a tool, Airtable? And I know you're, Curtis, a huge Airtable fan, that we're already using so that we can like quickly press a button, generate the image, get it back into the record, and then just kind of continue our workflow.
Yeah, so for this, using it in Airtable, we can hook up a button to a script, as I know you love to do on stream. And it'll be basically the same stuff you just took into Postman, but we'll just restructure a little bit so it runs as a script. Okay,
so let's go back into Airtable. Let's go back. It's our first time, 36 minutes, and we haven't been in Airtable. I think that's a record. So how should folks think about structuring their Airtable base, right? And then from structuring their Airtable base, how should they think about like, okay, well, I need to call the API from inside Airtable. How do I do that? So first, let's just focus on the structure of the base. And I know, like, Curtis, you're an Airtable expert, so I'm gonna let you kind of take it away. How should I structure my base to be able to create this right here?
Yeah, so when you're doing this, it's good to think about what you need to pass to the API. So in our case, it's just a single message. I think we'll just do it for that to keep it easy instead of passing the image as well. So we can change that notes column to, or we can create a new single text field, which is going to be the message that we're going to pass.
Yeah, so message, single line text, boom. And
then we're going to want somewhere to store the image that we generate. So that will be an attachment field. So we can name it image or graphic or whatever you'd like. And for name, we don't really need anything. I mean, you can make it an auto number, or if this is part of a bigger base or a table, and you have other stuff there, you probably have a name already, but auto number works for us right now.
Yeah. Now, no one hate on me. I usually don't recommend doing this. It's an example. So don't quote me on the auto number as the primary field, but that's okay. Informative and unique. It's halfway there. It's unique, but it's not informative, but that's okay. Okay. So but what if, if I'm looking at this, how should I think about mapping the fields to the different elements? Could I put more? How should folks think about that, Curtis, when they're structuring their Airtable base to go towards Bannerbear?
Yeah, so it tells you in that JSON string exactly what stuff it's accepting. So it's going to accept two things from us. It's going to accept a message, and it's going to accept a face. Now, if we want to do the face, yeah, we could do that. That'll just be another attachment field.
Okay.
So yeah,
Let's start without it, and then
Okay.
if we have time, let's add it in. But let's just start with just changing the text, and then we could kind of, so essentially you're right. Like we have one modification, right? So that's the little array here, and then the first is just the message, and then the other is the face in the bottom right. But in Bannerbear, I can create as many as I want, right? I could have one image on the right, then another image on the left, little graphs as you mentioned. So really depends how you create your template, right? So we're not going to go into editing that template, but that's really where you can add other variables or other modifications that you can create. Okay, so we have this. So our message is going to be Alex Wolf is great at most things, especially at Airtable. There we go. Shout out to Alex Wolf. Also the coolest name, I think, Alex Wolf. Okay, and then the image is when we're going to return this right here with the text from the record. Okay, so far I understand. Now, how do I connect this from Airtable to the Bannerbear API?
Using a feature of Airtable that I know you love, we're going to use a button, and we're going to run a script off that button.
Okay, let's do the button at the end. Let's do it without the button, and then we'll write a script. So I already started a script, and it just has. Curtis was nice enough to write the script before in case we mess up, but I'm hiding it. Let's do it without. Boom. So what are the steps? What are the steps that this API needs to do? Let's do an outline. We're doing best practices here. What's the outline of this script?
Yeah, so first we're going to have to get the record that we're dealing with. And when you do a button press, your records async call will get the record that you are dealing with. And then from there, we're going to make our API call. So we're going to make sure we pass the headers in. We're going to make sure we're using the right URL. And then we're going to make sure we're passing the right JSON. And part of that JSON is going to be getting some of the cell values from the record that we just got.
Okay, so a few things. So we're going to get the record, essentially be like, okay, this is the record we're dealing with. Let's actually delete the other two. Boom. And then we're going to take the information from that, make the API call, and then in the JSON, this one right here, we're going to replace this right here with like take the value from the record. I can zoom. I can totally zoom. Boom. Boom. Is this better? I think that's better. This might be better. There we go. Okay, cool. So how do we get the record we're dealing with? Essentially, how do we get an input into the script so that we can dynamically select the record we want to run with?
Yeah, so in Airtable, this is going to be a two-step. First, we've got to get the table that we're dealing with. So do something like let table equal.
Like get table. Is table reserved? I think table is reserved. So let's get.
Yeah, I think so. So it's going to be a lowercase
one
t.
table. Yeah, let's go with one table. I'm sorry. I'm ashamed that there's a developer that's gonna like be judging how I name all the variables. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really bad at naming variables. So we're saying is gonna be what is the input? Get record create.
So for this it'll be base.getTable.
Right.
and then whatever the table is named.
I
I
think
think it
I
is
have a table
probably.
one. Let's rename it. Let's call this
And the
images.
fantastic thing about Airtable scripts is the autocomplete. So
Yeah,
it autocompletes like field names and table names, and I kind of love that about it.
absolutely. It is honestly, as someone who doesn't write code for a living, it is like a savior. Just a like FYI, if you're ever like, oh, how do I do that? Like table, it's gonna tell you how to get table and get all that information. So there's like a little useful API documentation right there. Cool. Okay, so I got the table. What's next?
And so, yeah, so this is where we're going to get the record that we clicked on or that you can pick when you're
Mm-hmm.
running the script. So call it whatever you want. I would call it record probably, but
Boom.
and that's going to be so you're going to await, and that's input.record async.
Boom. And then I have a
And
message,
that,
right?
yeah, so usually it's something like pick a record. When you run the script on its own, that'll be a prompt the user gets. But when you click a button, it skips that and just uses the record that the button was part of.
Input. Yeah, there we go. So let me just look at the documentation. So I have a label, and that is the first parameter. So I'm saying, which record do you want to run on? And then source is the one table.
Right.
And that's pretty
And
much it. Yeah.
you're going to have to remove the space between record async and the first parentheses for this to,
Boom.
there we go.
Okay, let's just run it. I'm a fan of running.
If you console log, it'll actually output it to the screen. That's a programmer trick. Console log all the things.
All the things. Absolutely. Boom. So it didn't, let's run it again. We're saying, okay, go pick a record, and then it's going to console log everything about that record. We're picking Alex Wolf. Boom. So it's saying, okay, I got the record ID, and I've got the name, which is our primary field, which is 1. Both of those let us identify the record that was picked. Folks are asking, so I'm going to do it. Let's just do, we should always console.log all the things. Boom. Just as a reminder, we're going to keep that in the script. For the future, folks copying this are going to be reminded, always console log all the things. Now we have the record. How do I think about running an API call in Airtable, which I imagine is going to be quite different than in in Postman?
Yeah, so there's actually an API section on this. So if you look up fetch in the API within Airtable, there are 2 different ways you can do it, and I can explain both. One is going to be browser fetch, and one is remote fetch async. So the difference is fetch is going to make the request directly from your browser to that API. Most of the time, that'll work just fine. In cases where it doesn't, because sometimes some APIs don't like talking directly to the browser, you can use that remote fetch async, which actually does a little bit of Airtable magic, and it runs it from Airtable servers instead of directly from your browser. Everything else looks exactly the same, except you use your remote fetch async instead of fetch.
Absolutely. So I personally, I don't know about you, and there's a good question for you. Like, I always use remote fetch async. There's like no reason for me not to. Was that like a best practice you would recommend as well?
Yeah, you can do that. It's going to avoid a class of API errors that is really difficult to debug, even for the most experienced of developers. So yeah, if you want to do that, there is no difference except the API request is going to be made from Airtable servers instead of right from your browser.
Okay, cool. So another thing that I always do is I copy paste the example and then go through the verbs that we just went through. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm copy pasting. Let me hide the docs. And so now I have my API call. So let's go through each one of these one by one. So what should I change first, Curtis?
Yeah, so this is probably looking very familiar to what we had in Postman. So first thing we can change is the URL. So if we take the URL we had in Postman, we can copy and paste it right into there.
Boom.
The next thing down the line is the method. So this is what we're calling verb. It's the post That's what we're going to keep it as, but you can also do get and patch and delete and all those other wonderful verbs. But for now, we're just going to keep it as post.
Awesome.
Body is going to be what we put in the body in our Postman call. So if you go and copy that.
So I'm going to copy paste this whole JSON. Boom. And then I'm replacing this hi there with
Yeah,
my
so I
whole
can go,
JSON.
yeah, I can go. So including the quotes also has to get replaced. So you'll see this thing here called JSON.stringify. It's kind of self-documenting, but it's going to take our big object and it's going to turn it into a string, and that's so it can be sent properly over the browser as an API request. And on the other end, they'll actually turn it from a string back into JSON. It's just it's a more compact way of sending the request. You don't do that in Postman because Postman does it for you automatically. So this is us kind of doing everything manually ourselves. So we've got to take that step into account.
So just so folks, like if you get the API call to work in Postman, you can copy paste your body into the parentheses around stringify, and it's going to take your JSON, turn it into a string, send it to Bannerbear or whatever API you're calling, so that that API can understand what it is you're sending as a string, and then it's going to like unparse it and probably turn it into a JSON so it can interpret it. But this is actually one of the common mistakes, is that take JSON.stringify, copy paste the body, and then that's that's a tip. That's it. That's a tip. Okay. Next, what is next? Yeah, Curtis, where do we go from here?
So headers is next. Actually, this example code is structured exactly how we should think about this. So headers gets very complicated very quickly. There's probably only two you'll ever need to use. Content type just tells the server on the other end what you are sending it. And so this is perfectly fine as it is right now. It's just saying JSON. And the special keyword for telling another server that you're sending it JSON is application/JSON. You can send text, you can send XML, you can send all sorts of stuff. Most of the time, you're going to be sending JSON, and so this can just stay as it is.
Perfect.
And there's one other header, and header is basically all the metadata you might want to share with that server. And in some cases, it's required. So the other one that we need to pass along is our API key. And so that's through something called an authorization header. So if you just start a quote and you do authorization, and then this was in the Bannerbear API reference, but you're going to start it with the keyword bearer with capital B.
Let me just go back. Authentication, boom, authorization, and then bearer. And I need quotation marks, right? This is going to be a string. And then I'm writing the word bearer, which is a kind of constant, if you will. And I go back into, actually, I have it here. This is a pro tip. I think.
Yeah, you can go into Postman and grab it.
Oh, right. I have it in Postman. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So you can see how Postman kind of makes a lot of this stuff easier, because when you selected bearer token, it's automatically going to format things and add that header for you. So it kind of gets out of your way and gives you a lot of common tools that you'd be using. But when you're hooking it up through an Airtable script like this, that's all the stuff you have to do manually. So you've got to kind of do all the nice things that Postman usually does for you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the only thing, so here, let's. I'm going to propose something, Curtis. Let's run this API call. Let's change the text to be, we ran this from Airtable. And what does this do? The console.log await.response.json.
Yeah, so await, without getting too far into it, when you await something, you're basically waiting for whatever the function call is to get done what it's doing. So we used it up above in fetch. So it's basically saying, hey, when you're done doing the fetch, store the result in this variable. The same way we're console logging there, we're saying, okay, now we've got the response. It takes a little bit for us to turn that into JSON. So when you're done with that, console log it.
Okay. So let's go ahead and run this. So our expectation is that we get a response here. And I'm using the sync API, so we should instantly get a response with the URL of the image, right? So let's run that. I'm going to pick Alex Wolf. console log all the things. So now it's running that API call. And here I have the response of the API call. So if I come here on this URL, I should see, boom, amazing. No confetti, not yet. We have one more step, right? So actually 2 more steps here. How do we make this text, we ran this from Airtable, come from the record? So I select a record, but it's not actually inputting into the API call.
Right. So that's on line, I think it's 18. So that text that we've been modifying, now instead of having the quotes there, we're actually going to use record.get cell value as string.
Okay, so record is this record that was selected, right? But we don't want the, so if I go record dot, I could get the ID, right? Or I can get the name, but that's not what I want. What I want from that record is the message. So I actually have to tell Airtable, like, okay, go to that record, get cell value as string, and the cell value I want to get is message, right? So this is telling us go to record, get the cell value as string. Is it called record?
Yeah, it's complaining because it might not be found. But
okay.
We can ignore that for now.
Right, because it doesn't know if it's been picked, so none could be picked, right? That makes sense. Okay, so if I run this, I should get the record, and then it should say Alex is the best. Boom. Is that okay? Let's run this. This is where my heart starts beating a little bit. So run, pick record, Alex Wolf. Okay. See, this is what's wrong with API calls. They should put confetti in the API call so when it works, boom, okay. If I get this, boom. All right, before last step, right? So now it's actually returning the right text. Actually, there's 2 more steps. There are 2 more steps. We're almost there, folks, with the confetti, I promise. How do I take this image and return it to here, right? Because right now I don't want to go to this URL every time and then save image. I want it to be returned to Airtable.
Right. So it's actually pretty easy. So right underneath where we did a console log for the response.json, we actually want to store that response.json as another variable so we can actually grab the URL from it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're creating a variable, and then I want to go to the response.
Yeah, you'll still have to do an await response.json.
Oh, right. I want to hold the whole response, right? So here it's actually
because the last time we did it, we just printed it to screen without saving it anywhere.
So Bannerbear, I'm gonna call this Bannerbear response. Again, just really bad at naming things. Okay, let's run that, and let's console.log Bannerbear. Console.log Bannerbear response. Actually, this should return the same thing as this, right? Because we're just
it will be, yeah.
Okay, so we don't need to do that. Let's just remember.
So what you could console log is Bannerbear response dot image underscore URL.
Boom.
And I know it's called that because I can see the JSON there, and
right
we're
here,
just picking one of the fields from the JSON that came back.
Okay, boom. Boom. Okay, that's the URL. So now we want to input that into the record, the one that we picked. So how do we update that record?
Yeah, so we're going to go back to the table API. So it'll be table.update record async.
I think I called it one
table.
Oh,
sorry, one table.
Yeah, sorry about that. Update. So I need to do an await, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm saying,
let
me just.
Yeah, it should be record.id. It's the record ID is the first thing you pass into it.
Update record. So record or record ID. So we're going to go into record.id. Right.
And then the second thing is going to be all the fields that you want to update. So in our case, we're going to use like an open curly brace, and we're going to pass it an object. So in quotes,
So do I need a curly?
you can just put.
Oh, I can just put the
No, you
field
can
name
just
directly.
Yeah, you can put the field name directly. So that I think that will be image.
Yep. I need that. There we go. And then.
Now this is something that's tricky about Airtable attachment fields. It's actually an array. So you need a square brace. And then in there, you're going to do another curly brace. URL is going to be the field name here. And then you're going to pass the Bannerbear response.image URL there.
Boom. Okay, so Alex, we're almost at confetti. We're like 2 seconds away from confetti. You can't leave now. Boom. So it's giving me some errors here. What doesn't it like? It doesn't like this one, right? It's not closed, essentially. So after this one, we're going to close that. I think I'm missing some. Do we need curly brackets for the fields?
After the last, so on line 48, just add a curly brace after the square brace. I think we're good.
Boom. So
Maybe.
This one doesn't close anything, though. This is where, let's go look at your script. Boom. Curly. I want to make sure people leave. So let me just copy paste this whole thing, actually. I want people to see the confetti. What people come here for. That, boom. Okay, and this is Bannerbear response. Boom. And why do we have an empty curly bracket here?
We shouldn't. I think that's just left over.
Okay, and then this is called one table. There we go. Still doesn't like it. Did you have curly brackets everywhere?
If you hover over it, Airtable should be very helpful in telling you exactly what it doesn't like.
Everything. It doesn't like anything. Oh, object is possibly null. That's okay. We know that, right? And so here,
yeah, that's fine.
Expected a comma.
Oh, it's because you have a space. No?
Let's check. All right, folks. So await update record async, record ID, comma, image, array. And this one, you did have an empty curly bracket here.
Yeah, that shouldn't be.
Record or record ID.
Oh, we're missing a beginning one after record ID on line 43.
Oh,
so
right
after
here?
the comma, it should be, yeah.
And then we want one to end here as well. Whoops, that's not the right type. So let's map these curly brackets. We're going to get there, folks. So open closes here, right? So that's fine. And then we're saying image is an array. Oh, do I need this?
Because it doesn't have any special characters, it shouldn't matter.
All right, fields. Whoops. Let's see what it's telling us. It's saying...
Is the field actually called image?
Oh, shit. Yeah, it is.
Oh, it
image
is.
Right here. Bear with us, folks. We're going to get this fixed in 2 minutes. I promise. We're going to cut this in post. Could it be an error because it doesn't know that record ID works? And so it doesn't know, but how does it know which table to update? Oh, it's one table, right? So this works.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's no like concept of fields like this. We need to put all of this in.
When I coded it, it just accepted image as the field name. So maybe we can copy paste it, or
Paste the whole thing and give it a
Copy
run.
and paste just that. Oh, well, copy and paste just that the table.update record async and see.
Okay.
Because now that you fixed that weird curly brace issue, maybe we can get it working.
Okay, let's try that. Boom, and we're saying this is one table, right? The record.id, image is correct, and we're saying here it should be Bannerbear response. And this closes that. And then you did have a curly bracket here for some reason. So we have an extra curly bracket
I think
here.
just a copy. That was just a copy paste issue, I think.
Oh, okay, so we should put one here.
Is that image field actually an attachment?
Let's check. Yeah. Attachment. Let's run it. Let's see what it, maybe it'll run it anyway. Let's give it a test. So let's just run it. What didn't it like? One table. So it's probably erroring because of this.
If you go back down, I wonder if we've.
Boop, 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 boop. Await record ID that we have. Update record async. Await. Boom, image. Open the array. URL. And then closed it. And you had a curly bracket here.
But that's just a copy paste issue, I think.
And then
shouldn't actually be there. Are we sure that the rest of the stuff we didn't make an error further up in the console logs? So
let's
if we take away,
let's try this. Oh, that seems to be working. So let's just rewrite it. Let's just restart. Await one table. And let's actually not make it dynamic first. We're saying record.id, right? And then the fields that we want updated should be update record async. Oh, I need to write update record async. And here we're saying the fields, an object mapping field, names or IDs. Okay, and so we do need a curly bracket at the beginning. Boom. And we're saying update image, and let's just give it of the URL that we just created, right? But you're saying that this should also be an object, right?
it's got to be, has to be an array with an object inside, yeah.
With an object inside that we're saying the URL. Let's give it this right here. That. And then like this. And then did we close the curly bracket? Yeah, we did. So this is, we can actually not run the rest. This has become a learn Airtable scripting stream, which is totally fine.
It's going to be the silliest little error.
Oh, I know. Oh, so it doesn't recognize one table. So let's just do this. Let's keep one table. Boom. And I think it is auto number. Oh, it's a comma after. Does it expect a comma? It does have one here, so it doesn't seem to change anything. Let's try this. Pick a record. Image does not exist in table images. Field image. But it clearly does exist. Oh, there's a space. God damn it.
I knew it was going to be something stupid.
Okay, sorry, folks. Now you know what the life of a developer in Airtable feels like. Okay.
Now imagine doing that, but spending like 6 hours and then realizing you misspelled something.
Okay. Bannerbear response dot image URL. So now let's unhide all that stuff.
No comma or no. You've got a misplaced punctuation.
Oh, I do right here. Boom. Okay, let's add the button as well. Let's try to do two things at once. And we're gonna button field, generate image, run script. Gonna be a nice little green. Select an option, dashboard 1, scripting, create field. Boom. So if this works, and no promises that it does, we should generate the image. It's gonna run it. And we've just created that image. Let's give it a second to load. Open that, boom. Confetti. You deserve it. All right. So that is how you run an API from Postman and then from Airtable. And thank you all for your patience. And you got a glimpse into what it feels like to write, I guess, code for a living or so. Yeah, thank you so much, Curtis, for showing us how to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This has been great, and yeah, you got a little glimpse into why it takes us 2 weeks to spin up a website when you could do the same in Webflow. It's because of the spaces and punctuation and things like that trip us up.
Oh my God. I can't believe we spent 10 minutes because of a space. But what I hope people take away is, that path that we did where we look at the API documentation, we try to run it in Postman, we kind of get those big pieces out, and then write the script in Airtable or even in Zapier API calls, or they call it the webhook module, is the right way of, I think, the best way of going about and getting your API calls running. So you can also run this in an automation, right? So you can have a checkbox that runs an automation, runs that script. All of that is available. So Curtis, any parting words for folks, additional material that they should be aware of as they're diving into APIs? Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, me and Colleen are starting up the essential resource for API, essential resource for APIs for no coders. It's called APIsforNoCoders.com. So it's going to be a couple free articles and then maybe some email course type stuff. But if you sign up there, you'll hear all the updates. Also wanted to shout out On Deck. We are always hiring. So if you are a no coder and you enjoy this type of stuff, we are always hiring no coders. If you're more of an engineer, I also hire engineers to help us with the no code stuff. So beyonddeck.com/careers for all of that. And I also have to plug the fantastic ODNC, which is On Deck No Code Fellowship. The third cohort just got announced. It's a fantastic community. It's 8 weeks working with some of the most talented no coders out there. And all you do is just ship stuff and iterate and become a far better no coder than you came in with. And you get a giant community to cheer you on every step of the way.
Amazing. Yeah, and we've got some folks from On Deck, Rory and others in the chat. So Curtis, huge thanks for you for coming. Everyone, take a time to like, subscribe, comment, do all that YouTube stuff. Really appreciate it. Really helps the stream keep going. Hope to see you next week. Always exciting to automate stuff with you all. So I'll be back next week. Have a great week, y'all. And Curtis, huge thanks to you again for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time and teaching us how to use APIs as no coders. Bye, everyone. Bye, Curtis.